Checkmate. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap, sharp and final. Gasps rippled through the glass-walled boardroom. The Ivory King toppled onto its side with a soft click against the board, and for the first time in his polished, glittering career, Alexander Whitford, billionaire CEO of Whitford Innovations, had nothing to say. Across from him sat Claire Thompson, her gray janitor's uniform still faintly damp from mop water, her amber-brown eyes fixed steady on his. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't smiled, hadn't gloated. The simple word, checkmate, was enough to slice through the laughter of the executives who just moments before had been circling, eager for a spectacle. Alexander's face flushed crimson, his blue eyes wide, his jaw twitching. Then the smirk he always carried, the smirk that had charmed shareholders and crushed competitors, faltered into silence. The room shifted. Some of the executives stared at Claire like she had grown a second head. Others leaned back, biting down laughter they dared not let escape. A janitor, a black janitor, beating the man who ran their entire empire. But this wasn't how the night began. A few hours earlier, Claire had been alone on the top floor, humming quietly to herself as she wiped down the mahogany conference table. The skyline of Chicago glittered outside the wall-length windows, an endless sprawl of light and shadow. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor as she worked, her back aching from a long shift. When she reached the head of the table, her rag froze. There it was again, the chessboard. Always perfectly arranged, every piece gleaming from obsessive polishing. She had noticed it weeks ago when she first took over cleaning this floor. Most nights she ignored it, fearing the cameras, the silent eyes of power that seemed to loom everywhere. But tonight, something in her rebelled. She set down the rag and drew closer. The carved ivory queen was exquisite, its crown etched with intricate detail. She touched it gently, the way a daughter might touch a family heirloom. In her mind, she saw her father's hands, broad, calloused, with nails always stained by factory work. He used to set her on his knee when she was a child, guiding her fingers across chipped wooden pieces on a board they'd bought from a flea market. Chess, Claire, he would say, is life. Don't just look at the board, look beyond it. See what your opponent can't. Her throat tightened. He had been gone 6 years now, lost to an illness the family couldn't afford to treat properly. Since then, she carried his lessons like sacred scripture. Her hands moved almost on their own, arranging the board into one of his favorite traps. A 3-move checkmate. The knight poised like a spear, the queen gliding like a shadow. It looked like a puzzle frozen mid-solution, a secret carved in ivory. She smiled faintly. "For you, Dad," she whispered. The sound of polished leather shoes striking marble snapped her upright. Her heart stuttered. Alexander Whitford walked in, flanked by 2 executives in tailored suits. He was younger than most CEOs, just 32, but carried himself like royalty. His blonde hair gleamed under the chandelier light, and his cufflinks flashed with every gesture of his manicured hand. His eyes locked onto the board, then onto her. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice smooth but edged with disdain. "And here I thought the janitorial staff was here to polish the floors, not play with my toys." The executives chuckled. Claire's hands curled into fists at her sides. She lowered her gaze, heat flooding her cheeks. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just..." "Just what?" Alexander interrupted, stepping closer. His cologne filled the air, sharp and expensive. "Practicing. For the Grand Championships?" He laughed, the kind of laugh designed for audiences, and his men echoed him. Claire swallowed hard. She wanted to melt into the floor. But something in her father's voice rose inside her. "See what your opponent can't." "I was only setting up a board position," she said softly. Alexander tilted his head, amused by her audacity. Then he smirked, the infamous Whitford smirk that had reduced seasoned executives to stammering children. "Tell you what," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "Let's make this interesting. If you can beat me right here, right now, I'll..." His pause stretched, cruel and calculated. "I'll marry you." The executives burst into roaring laughter. One slapped the table. Another muttered, "God, this is rich." Claire froze. The words cut through her, sharp as glass. To him, she was a joke, a janitor, a spectacle to entertain his cronies. She could have walked away, should have. But instead, something steeled inside her. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The room fell into silence. Alexander arched a brow, then lowered himself into the opposite chair. His long fingers brushed the pieces. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The game began. Claire's hands moved quickly, instinctively, as though guided by the ghost of her father's voice. Knight, pawn, queen. Her mind traced patterns years in the making. The executives leaned in, murmuring with every move. Alexander smirked, confident, until the trap sprung. "Checkmate." Her voice was calm, but it cracked the room open. The laughter that followed wasn't his. It belonged to the executives, shocked, delighted, unable to hide their disbelief. Alexander's knuckles whitened on the edge of the table, his perfect composure shattered. And for the first time, Claire felt taller than the man who towered above Chicago. The silence that followed was jagged, like broken glass scattered across the mahogany floor. Alexander Whitford stared at the board, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. The Ivory King lay toppled, a humiliating monument to his defeat. The executive's muffled chuckles swelled until one dared to whisper, "3 moves, she crushed him in 3. Another's hand shot up to stifle a laugh, but the shaking of his shoulders betrayed him. Alexander's eyes snapped up, icy blue, cutting through the air. "Enough!" His voice, low and dangerous, silenced the room. The laughter dissolved instantly into strained coughs and shuffled feet. Claire didn't move. She sat still, her posture straight, her amber eyes steady, even as her palms sweated against the edge of the table. A war raged inside her, one part of her terrified of retaliation, another swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Alexander pushed his chair back abruptly, the screech of its legs echoing. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, straightening his tie with jerky movements. "That's all this is." One of the executives, a balding man with a too bright smile, jumped in to soothe him. "Of course, sir. Anyone can stumble into a lucky sequence." Claire's gaze sharpened. She could taste the dismissal in the air. She had just humiliated a billionaire in front of his inner circle, but they were already rewriting the story, turning her brilliance into accident. Her father's voice echoed. "Don't let them take your truth." "I didn't stumble," Claire said, her voice low but carrying across the silent boardroom. "It was a planned sequence, the same one I practiced with my father when I was 12. Heads turned. The executives shifted uncomfortably. Alexander's jaw tightened. "So you're some sort of prodigy now?" "No," she replied evenly. "Just someone who sees the board differently." For a beat their eyes locked, his, pale, furious, desperate to reassert control. Hers, steady, quiet, unflinching. Then Alexander's smirk snapped back into place, brittle but practiced. "Fine," he said. "Play again." A murmur of anticipation swept the room. This was no longer a janitor being toyed with. This was becoming a duel. Claire hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. If she lost, he would use it to erase her first victory. If she won, his fury might deepen into something uglier. But another voice inside her, stubborn, defiant, answered back. "You already beat him once. Don't hide now." She gave a single nod. "Set the board." The second game dragged longer. Alexander, humiliated, played cautiously this time, sweat glistening along his temples. His moves were sharp but predictable, his style fueled by aggression rather than foresight. Claire countered each one with calm precision, her fingers moving lightly, as though guided by memory more than effort. She didn't glance at the executives gathering behind them, whispering in disbelief. She didn't flinch at Alexander's glare, or the way he slammed his rook down hard enough to rattle the pieces. 10 minutes in, she cornered him again, a flawless trap. "Checkmate," she whispered. The sound of it cracked him open. His fist hit the table, rattling the board, sending a pawn skittering to the floor. Gasps filled the room. One of the executives muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Alexander stood, towering over Claire, his chest heaving. His voice dropped into a hiss, meant only for her. You think this means anything? You're a janitor. You clean up after people who matter. That's all you'll ever be. The words hit harder than the fist on the table. Humiliation, sharp and acidic, burned in her chest. For a heartbeat, she wanted to shrink, to let him take back the power. But then she remembered her father's laugh, warm and proud when she executed her first real checkmate at 13. Remembered his hand ruffling her hair, his voice telling her, "The board doesn't care who you are, only how you play." She rose slowly, her chair scraping back. Her eyes lifted to meet Alexander's, steady despite the tremor in her hands. Looks like tonight, I mattered more than you." The boardroom froze. His face drained of color, his lips parted but no words came out. And then, the silence broke into something dangerous. Whispers. Executives leaning in, muttering too softly to be caught. A chuckle smothered behind a fist, eyes darting from Alexander to Claire and back again. In a world built on image, on dominance, on perfection, the mighty Alexander Whitford had been undone, twice, by the woman who scrubbed his floors. He stormed out, his footsteps echoing like gunfire in the cavernous hall. The crowd dispersed quickly, eager to pretend they hadn't witnessed what could ruin them if their boss found out they'd enjoyed it. Claire was left alone, standing over the chessboard, her chest rising and falling. Her knees shook, but her face stayed calm. From the corner of the room, Marcus, the head of security, stepped forward, his deep voice breaking the silence. "That was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen." Claire blinked, surprised. "But," Marcus added, his eyes darting toward the door Alexander had vanished through, "you need to be careful. Men like him don't lose quietly." His words hung heavy in the air. Because even though Claire had won, she knew the real game had only just begun. The next morning, Claire walked into the skyscraper lobby as though nothing had happened. Her mop bucket squeaked across the marble floor, the faint smell of disinfectant trailing behind her, yet everywhere she turned, whispers followed. 2 interns leaned near the elevators, their eyes wide. "That's her," one muttered. "The janitor who beat him? In 3 moves, twice." They glanced at Claire like she was both legend and curse, then quickly looked away when she caught their eyes. By the time she reached the service corridor, her stomach churned. This wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. She'd come here to earn a paycheck, keep her head down, send money to her younger brother back home, not to become the center of a storm. But storms, she realized, don't ask for permission. Upstairs, Alexander Whitford was already at war with himself. His office overlooked the whole of Chicago, but the view offered no comfort. His reflection in the glass, sharp suit, perfect hair, Rolex gleaming, looked like a stranger. Behind his desk, the chessboard waited, its ivory pieces neatly reset. He couldn't stop replaying the moment. Checkmate. The way the executives had gasped, the heat of humiliation crawling up his neck. He had built his life on control, on being the sharpest man in every room, but last night, a janitor, a black janitor in a faded uniform, had stripped it all away in front of his people. He clenched his fists. No. It couldn't end like that. By noon, whispers spread through the building. Alexander had summoned his executives to a private meeting. Claire's name floated on every tongue, but never in her presence. Some smirked with admiration, others hissed warnings, calling her foolish for crossing him. When Marcus intercepted her on her break, his face was grave. "He's planning something," he said, lowering his voice. "He can't let this go. Watch your back, Claire." Claire tightened her grip on her coffee cup. "I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus's dark eyes softened. "Doesn't matter. Men like Whitford don't forgive humiliation. They erase it." The words pressed heavy on her chest. Her shift that evening began tense. Normally, she blended into the background, an invisible rhythm of sweeping, scrubbing, polishing. Tonight, though, every corner felt watched. Security cameras blinked red. Executives passed her with stiff shoulders, murmuring into phones. Near midnight, as she wiped down a corridor of glass offices, she heard the sound. Chess pieces clinking. She froze. At the end of the hallway, Alexander's private lounge glowed. Through the glass, she could see him seated at the table, staring at the chessboard like it was an enemy. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled, his hair messier than usual. A half-empty glass of scotch glistened beside him. Her heart hammered. Walk away, she told herself. Don't give him the satisfaction. But then, his voice carried through the cracked door. You've been lurking. Come in. She hesitated, then pushed the door open. Alexander didn't look up. Sit. Claire stayed standing. I still have work. His lips curved, bitter. Funny. You've already done your work. Humiliated me. Twice. His fingers toyed with the ivory queen. Now the whole building's buzzing. The great Alexander Whitford, undone by a janitor. Claire's fists tightened at her sides. I didn't ask for this. No? His eyes finally met hers, sharp and glinting with something darker than arrogance. Then why play at all? You could have laughed off my little joke, could have walked away, but you didn't. You wanted to prove yourself. I wanted, she said slowly, to show you that your joke wasn't funny. For the first time, his smirk faltered, but then he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Play again. Right now. And this time, no tricks, no luck. If you win, he paused, his voice dipping low, I'll give you anything you want. Money, a promotion. Hell, I'll even honor my joke. Her stomach twisted. The way he said it, dripping with mockery, wasn't a promise but a trap. And if I lose? She asked. His smile returned, sharp as a blade. Then you admit to everyone that last night was a fluke, that you don't belong anywhere near this board. Claire's pulse thundered. He wanted to erase her victory, strip her of the only power she'd ever taken from him. No, she said, stepping back. I don't owe you anything. Alexander's face darkened, the mask slipping. Careful, Claire. In this building, I decide who matters, and right now, you're making yourself very small again. Her chest burns. Anger coiling hot beneath her ribs. She turned to leave, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reply. But as she stepped out, she caught sight of the executives lingering in the hall, watching, whispering. Their smirks told her everything. Alexander wasn't done. He was staging something. She didn't know when or how, but she felt it down to her bones. This wasn't just about chess anymore. It was about power. And Alexander Whitford wasn't going to lose quietly. The night of the shareholder gala arrived like a storm rolling over the city. Whitford Innovations rented the entire top floor of the Conrad Hotel, a hall glittering with chandeliers, tuxedos, champagne, and camera flashes. It was the night Alexander Whitford lived for, a stage where he could dazzle investors, charm the press, and remind the world why his empire shone brighter than the Chicago skyline itself. But beneath his flawless tuxedo and dazzling smile, Alexander's stomach knotted with fury. He had crafted his whole persona on perfection, on being untouchable, and yet every handshake, every toast, carried with it the whisper he couldn't silence. The janitor beat him. Twice. He planned to bury that humiliation tonight. Claire almost didn't come. She'd been summoned, not invited, by a crisp envelope slipped into her janitorial locker. Mandatory appearance, 7:30 p.m., Conrad Hotel, appropriate attire required. She had stared at the paper for hours, torn between dread and defiance. Marcus warned her not to go. This reeks of a setup, he said. He'll make a fool of you in front of everyone. But Claire remembered her father's words. Don't hide from the board. Face it. So here she was, walking into the ballroom in a borrowed black dress from her neighbor, her natural curls loose around her shoulders. She felt eyes burning into her the moment she entered. Murmurs rippled across the room like wind through tall grass. The janitor? She's here? God, this is rich. Claire's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself to move with quiet grace. She found Marcus near the back, stationed discreetly in security black. He gave her a small nod, the only comfort she had in the room full of predators. Then the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage, and Alexander strode out, every inch the king of his empire. His smile glowed as he raised his glass to thunderous applause. Tonight, he began, his voice booming, we celebrate another year of innovation, of dominance, of victory. He paused, letting the words sink in. And what better way to honor victory than with a little demonstration? The curtains behind him swept open. There it was. The ornate ivory and obsidian chessboard centered on a velvet-draped table, two chairs facing each other like thrones. Claire's stomach dropped. Alexander's eyes found hers instantly. "Miss Claire Thompson," he said, savoring each syllable. "Our very own, unexpected challenger." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Why don't you join me up here and prove to everyone that lightning can really strike 3 times?" The spotlight shifted, pinning her in place. Her legs felt heavy, but she moved forward, each step echoing against marble floors. Whispers followed her like shadows. She sat down across from him, her hands trembling under the table. Alexander leaned in, his smile sharp as broken glass. "This ends tonight," he whispered. The game began. At first, Claire's vision blurred from the weight of 100 eyes. She could hear investors murmuring, glasses clinking, the clicking of camera shutters. Alexander moved with aggression, slamming pieces down as if every strike could shatter her composure. Her heart pounded. Panic clawed at her throat. Then she saw the knight, the queen, the exact opening her father had taught her, the trap as old as her childhood. Her breathing steadied. Her hands moved with precision, sliding pieces like brushstrokes on a canvas. 5 moves in, she had him cornered. The crowd leaned forward, sensing something extraordinary. Her fingers touched the ivory queen. She met Alexander's gaze. His smirk faltered. "Checkmate." The word rang louder than the chandeliers above. The ballroom erupted, not in laughter this time, but in shock, gasps, even applause. A murmur spread like wildfire. She beat him again, the janitor, 3 times. Alexander's face drained of color. His hands trembled on the edge of the table. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The image, the mighty CEO undone by the woman who scrubbed his floors, played out in front of shareholders, cameras, the entire empire. Something inside him cracked. His fist slammed the table, rattling the pieces. But instead of rage, his voice broke. "I could never even beat my father," he choked out, words spilling raw and unplanned. His eyes glistened under the lights. "I've built everything to prove I'm better. But I can't even—" His voice collapsed into a shuddering breath. "I can't even win one damn game." The room froze. The king of Whitford Innovations, always perfect, always invincible, stood exposed, trembling, his arrogance shattered into something achingly human. And in the silence that followed, it was clear. The power had shifted forever. The ballroom buzzed like a hive disturbed. Shareholders in tuxedos leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. Journalists at the back scribbled into notebooks, camera flashes stuttering. And at the center of it all, Alexander Whitford, the untouchable king of Chicago's tech empire, stood unraveling before them. His perfect tuxedo hung loose, his voice trembled with something dangerously close to grief. "I built this company," he muttered, staring down at the fallen king on the board. "I built everything, to prove I wasn't weak. But I've never beaten him. Not once." His eyes lifted, blue and glassy, locking on Claire. "And now you. You make it look effortless." The silo. Ents was unbearable. Executives shifted uneasily, desperate for him to reclaim control, to smooth this disaster into another glittering performance. But Alexander wasn't performing anymore. He was confessing. Claire's hands gripped the edge of the table. She could feel every stare drilling into her, some curious, some pitying, some downright hostile. She hadn't come here to destroy him, she'd only wanted dignity. But now, she realized, dignity had a cost. The unraveling of a man who had once believed himself untouchable. She stood slowly, the velvet-draped chair sliding back. "This was never about humiliating you," she said, her voice steady though her chest raced. "It was about respect. Respect you don't give to anyone who isn't already wearing a suit, or a title, or a Rolex." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alexander swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. His arrogance flickered in him still, clinging like the last flame of a dying candle. "You think you've won something tonight?" Claire's amber eyes blazed in the spotlight. "I didn't win. I just showed you the truth. You're not untouchable. You never were." The room broke into whispers again, louder this time. Some clapped, tentative, then building, until a wave of applause rose against the chandeliers. Shareholders, investors, even a few executives stood, clapping not for Alexander, but for Claire. Alexander's face crumpled at the sound. His power, the image he had carefully built for years, was slipping from his grasp. He sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in his life, Alexander Whitford had no words. Back near the exit, Marcus folded his arms, a proud smile tugging at his lips. He had warned Claire, but now, watching the impossible unfold, he couldn't help but admire her fire. She glanced his way, and their eyes met for a fleeting moment. She had done it, not just for herself, but for every invisible worker in that skyscraper who had swallowed humiliation in silence. But victory has ripples, and ripples become waves. The next morning, headlines screamed across Chicago, "Janitor checkmates billionaire, 3 times. Whitford empire shaken after CEO's public collapse. Underdog genius humiliates tech mogul at gala." By noon, the stock dipped. By evening, angry shareholders demanded explanations. By midnight, memes of Claire's quiet checkmate flooded social media. And inside the skyscraper, executives whispered openly now, no longer hiding their smirks when Alexander passed. But Claire didn't feel like celebrating. She mopped the same marble floors that night, but every step felt heavier. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of attention pressing against her ribs. She hadn't asked for fame, for spectacle. She had only defended her dignity. Now the city was looking at her like she was something more, a symbol, a story. And Alexander Whitford? He was alone in his office, staring at the chessboard in silence, his empire teetering around him. The skyscraper no longer felt like Alexander Whitford's kingdom. In the days after the gala, the building hummed with a new kind of electricity. Executives who once trembled at his presence now exchanged sly glances behind his back. Assistants whispered in hallways, their voices tinged with a mixture of awe and disbelief. And everywhere Claire went, eyes followed her. Some were admiring, interns nodding respectfully as she passed, a receptionist slipping her free coffee with a conspiratorial smile. Others were hostile, executives narrowing their eyes, muttering that she had embarrassed the company. Claire kept her head down, mop buckets squeaking across the marble floors. But inside, a storm churned. She had never wanted this spotlight. She only wanted respect. But respect, it seemed, came wrapped in consequences. On the 40th floor, the boardroom buzzed with tension. The shareholders had gathered, their voices sharp, cutting through the air like knives. "This company can't survive a spectacle like this," one barked. "Our stock is bleeding," another snapped. "Investors are calling this a circus." "Your father would never have let it come to this," an elderly board member added, his tone laced with venom. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his perfect suit doing little to hide the exhaustion carved into his face. His blue eyes were bloodshot, his jaw shadowed with stubble. For the first time he looked less like a king and more like a man drowning. "Enough," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll fix it." "How?" another board member scoffed. "By losing to her again?" The room erupted in cold laughter. Alexander flinched, the sound cutting deeper than he let them see. He stood abruptly, the chair screeching behind him. "This meeting is over." That night, Claire was cleaning the executive lounge when the door swung open. Alexander stood in the doorway, his frame filling the space. His tie hung loose, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. She froze, rag in hand. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She raised a brow. "About another game?" "No." He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed. "About everything." Her chest tightened, but she didn't back down. "What do you want, Mr. Whitford?" His voice cracked. "Respect. The same thing you wanted." For the first time, she saw it. The mask of arrogance stripped away, leaving only a man haunted by shadows. He sank into a chair, his hands trembling as they rubbed his temples. "My father," his voice faltered. He tried again. "He was a chess champion, brilliant, ruthless. I spent my childhood trying to beat him, but I never could. Not once. He died before I got the chance, and now—" His eyes lifted to hers, glassy and raw. "Now every time I lose, it's like he's laughing at me from the grave." Claire's chest ached. She had never expected to feel pity for him, but here it was, tugging at her. She set down the rag and slowly sat across from him. Losing doesn't mean you're weak, she said softly. It means you're human. You've spent your whole life trying to prove something to a ghost. Maybe it's time you start proving something to yourself. His jaw clenched, his eyes shining. For a moment, the arrogant CEO looked like a broken boy. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Something shifted. But then, the intercom crackled. "Mr. Whitford, the press is here for your statement." Alexander straightened instantly, the mask snapping back over his face. "Thank you, Claire," he said, but his tone was distant, controlled. "You should go." As she left, she caught her reflection in the glass. She didn't see just a janitor anymore. She saw someone who had forced the mighty to look at themselves, and she knew the final reckoning was near. 2 days later, Alexander Whitford called a press conference. The hall was packed. Journalists, cameras, shareholders. The world was waiting to see if the king of Whitford Innovations would survive his humiliation. Claire watched from the back, her heart pounding. Alexander stepped to the podium, adjusting the mic. He looked out at the sea of faces, then, shockingly, he gestured. "Before I begin," he said, his voice steady, "I want to invite someone to the stage. The woman who showed me, and all of you, that arrogance blinds even the smartest among us. Claire Thompson." The room gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. Claire's knees trembled, but she walked forward, the sound of her heels echoing like thunder. When she stood beside him, Alexander took a deep breath. His blue eyes flicked to her, then to the cameras. "It's time I admit," he said, his voice raw. "I've been defeated. Not just at chess, but at being the kind of leader my company, and this world, deserves." A hush fell over the room. And Whitson. With that, the king finally stepped off his throne. The silence in the press hall was suffocating, like the air before a storm. Cameras whirred, their red lights blinking, recording every second as the billionaire CEO laid himself bare. Alexander's words hung in the air. "I've been defeated. Not just at chess, but at being the kind of leader my company, and this world, deserves." The audience shifted uneasily. Some shareholders glared daggers, faces tight with fury. Others looked stunned, as though the ice around their perception of Alexander had finally cracked. Reporters leaned forward, pens racing, microphones stretching closer. Beside him, Claire stood stiff, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was not what she'd wanted, not exactly, but she knew this moment was bigger than both of them. Alexander cleared his throat. His voice was softer now, but firm. "I mocked a woman whose strength and intelligence far outshone my arrogance. I treated her like she was beneath me, when in truth, she revealed that I had been living beneath myself, beneath fear, beneath pride, beneath the shadow of a man I could never truly beat. For that, I owe her an apology." He turned then, not to the crowd but to Claire. "I am sorry, Claire Thompson, for my arrogance, for my cruelty, for turning your dignity into my game." His voice cracked. "I humiliated you in front of others, and you crushed me, not just in chess but in spirit, and you were right to do so." A murmur swept through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Claire felt her throat tighten. She had braced herself for many outcomes. More mockery, more belittling, maybe even being erased entirely. But not this. For a long, aching moment, she said nothing. She simply looked at him, her dark eyes steady, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Apologies mean nothing if there only were. Zai." The hall held its breath. Alexander nodded slowly. "Then let me show you," he said. He turned back to the crowd, squaring his shoulders. "As of today, I am establishing a new program within Whitford Innovations, one that funds education and mentorship for service workers who have ambitions beyond the roles society assigns them. It will be named the Thompson Initiative." Gasps erupted. Journalists' pens flew across their notepads. Claire's breath caught. Alexander wasn't finished. His voice grew stronger. "Claire showed me that brilliance can live anywhere, in boardrooms, in classrooms, and yes, even in janitorial closets. If I can recognize it in her, then I must help recognize it in countless others." The audience exploded into chaos. Some clapped, others shouted questions, a few hissed in disapproval. But the cameras caught it all. The king had fallen, and rebuilt himself in front of the world. Later, when the lights and cameras were gone, Claire found herself alone on the rooftop garden, staring out at the New York skyline. Her mop bucket and cleaning cart felt like relics of another lifetime. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. "You changed everything," Alexander said quietly. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool night air. "You changed yourself. I only forced you to look." He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze lost in the glittering skyline. He looked younger now, softer, no longer the untouchable CEO, but a man who had laid down his armor. "I don't expect forgiveness," he admitted, "but I hope one day, maybe you'll play me again." Claire chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Only if you've learned how to lose gracefully." For the first time, he smiled. Not the smug grin of a conqueror, but the small, tentative smile of someone learning what it meant to be human. They stood there in silence, two figures from different worlds, bound together by an unlikely game. Claire thought of the countless nights she'd dreamed of being seen, truly seen. Now so he was. And though her journey was far from over, tonight she carried something no one could strip away: dignity. The city roared beneath them, alive and endless. And for once, Alexander Whitford listened to it all in silence, humbled by the truth that had set him free. The story closed, not with a king's victory, nor with a servant's defeat, but with the quiet, steady triumph of a woman who refused to bow. And in her defiance, the world shifted.